We are back again. Yes, we are. The 415ers podcast coming to you as always 3 times a week on the Odyssey Sports Podcast Network. Evan Giddings, Marc Grandy with you. Marc, it's a preview Friday before week 6, 49ers Falcons. What's going on, man?
Just a lovely Friday, Evan. Excited for another week of football. Getting ready. Niners still out on the East Coast after a win last week. They'll get back home. They won't travel much after this. So enjoy this 10 a.m. game while you can because you won't have a Niners morning football for the rest of the season.
Yeah, it's kind of nice, honestly, to wake up on a nice Sabbath, grab a cup of Joe, and just put your feet up and watch the Niners. I mean, obviously, they're going to be happy to not have to go to the East Coast anymore at this point or have any long swings. But sometimes these games are can get a little interesting. And for them to be early in the morning here on the West Coast, I don't know about you, Marc. I kind of enjoy the 10 a.m. games sometimes when the West Coast team gets to go out back.
I'll be honest with you. The best time in my mind is when the team that I care most about, the 49ers, kicks off at 1, which generally is what happens
Not
because
125.
well, yeah, 105, 125, anywhere around there works for me because I mean, I'm sure you're similar, but I'm a big red zone guy. My preference is Scott Hansen, and generally speaking, you're shaking your head. Are you not a Scott Hansen guy? Are you an
I
Andrew
usually no, no,
Siciliano
no.
guy?
I don't mind red zone. I don't mind Scott Hansen. I usually just like to lock in on one game, to be quite honest. So I'll,
Well,
I'll kind
so
of had red zone on in the back, maybe getting. And my fantasy team's not very good, Marc. So I'm not really locked in as far as all the different touchdowns that my team refuses to score is concerned.
See, that's the point though. I want to have the prime red zone hours open so I can focus on red zone. And generally there are more games in the early window, the 10 o'clock window than the 1 p.m. window. So I can watch for red zone from 10 to 1, and then I'll switch over and focus on, the Niner game. But obviously this week is different because they're playing at 10 o'clock. You have to lock in there and then you can, figure out your red zone viewing later. But ideally, I think that's the way I like it. But I'm not complaining about some morning football either.
See, maybe this is where we differ in our ideologies when it comes to viewing athletic events. Because to me, I would rather watch a game in the morning, have my team win, preferably, or lose, and then have the rest of the day to reconcile with whatever emotions I'm going through after said game. So if I can wake up, I'll probably I'll be honest, I'll be a little doozy from Saturday night. So, I'll have maybe, you know, I don't know, hair of the dog, so to speak, a little bit in the morning, get things going. And then as the game progresses, figure out, how I'm going to feel about the game. And the game's done by 1 o'clock. So I don't know, maybe call me somewhat of an early sports riser, but I don't know, man, getting the entire day to then figure out how I feel about an actual win or loss to me is a little more valuable than getting done at like 4:30 and then you don't have time to go out and maybe run an errand. I don't know. Maybe I'm just a 10 a.m. guy.
No, I mean, my goal on Sundays is as much football as possible. So I want to watch when there are a lot of games on. I want to be locked into those games. And that's why I use Red Zone, especially early in the morning, because there are a bunch of games happening right then. I run all my errands, on Fridays, before or after work. And then on Saturday, choose the window where there's not a good college football game on and go get all your stuff done. And then you can just lock in on your couch all Sunday. That's the best way to go about it. We're getting off track, but we could probably talk about, the way that we view our sporting events for a whole episode, but we should probably get onto the 49ers. Huh?
I mean, I guess if you want. Grandy rests on the Sabbath. That's pretty much the takeaway from the first 4 minutes.
Exactly.
49ers, Falcons. Niners on the road, week 6, 3-2 their record. Falcons are 2-3 after a tough loss last week against the Buccaneers, to be quite honest. Niners are 5-point favorites in this game. Total is 44.5. But where I want to start, Marc, is because it seems like the last few episodes that we've done, and understandably so, we've pretty much started with the 49ers defense, and they've been absolutely outstanding. Like they're on a historic pace as far as yards per play, points per game. They've been very, very good so far this year. They just gave up their 5th touchdown of the season in their 5th game against Carolina last week. And so now I want to start with the offense here on today's episode, and specifically with the quarterback, because Jimmy Garoppolo had some interesting comments about kind of the 49ers culture. And this is something that every single team has to undergo as far as creating an identity. And I think a lot of people and a lot of fans for the 49ers are on the same page that it feels a lot like 2021, but to me, kind of having that continuation of last season and a team that was very successful is pretty interesting to be able to sort of run it back in a sense, especially when you're introducing new pieces to running it back. And one of the pieces that's been very influential, especially on defense, primarily, is Mooney, as you called him. Mooney, don't call me Charvarious Ward, right?
Yeah.
So Jimmy Garoppolo was talking about Mooney Ward and how impressive he's been. And something stood out to us in that, a reporter kind of asked to follow up when Jimmy said basically, look, he's made of the right stuff, right? He's one of us. And Jimmy kind of extrapolated on that, or, went in a little more depth saying, like, you know, when everyone is pulling in the same direction, like it's hard to describe, but basically, when a guy fits in and when he doesn't. And it seems like a lot of guys on the 49ers kind of unquestionably fit in, which, as simple as that sounds, Mark, I don't know if you can necessarily say that for a lot of other teams around the league.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of teams who kind of preach, bringing in good guys, high character guys, and in kind of promoting and developing, chemistry within a team. Obviously, every team would want that, but I would say the vast majority of teams tend to err on the talent side as opposed to the, how does this guy's personality fit, with the team. I feel like the 49ers are maybe on one extreme where I'm not saying one extreme is they're, completely ignoring talent because of course they're not, but they're on the extreme, I think, in the league where they probably value that character and those personalities more than other teams do. And obviously you're going to get things wrong. There are exceptions. There are times where either you misjudge a certain player's character or the way they are away from the football field. There are examples, we could go down a list, but I do think the 49ers tend to I don't know, worry about those things more than other teams. I mean, that was most of the conversation around Trey Lance. Was obviously they felt like he was a good player, but also, I mean, how many times did we hear Kyle Shanahan and John Lynch throughout, right after the draft process and even up to now keep saying, well, maybe, whatever you want to say about him as a player, but he is a great guy. He is exactly the guy that we thought that he was. So I think those things really matter to the 49ers. And what Jimmy Garoppolo pointed out is that, Mooney Ward is also one of those guys. One thing that Garoppolo said in that same answer that you're referencing is he thinks guys who don't fit in with this franchise, they simply don't last here very long. And when you're made of the right stuff, when you're built like one of us, you'll fit in, perfectly. So I mean, that's the answer right there. If you are not, pulling in the same direction, if you're not getting along with people in this locker room, you're probably going to be on your way out of the door relatively soon, whether or not you're a good player, a bad player, whatever the case is. In the case of Mooney Ward, I mean, he's both. He's been phenomenal as a shutdown corner. We talked about it, I think, a couple episodes ago in the reaction to the win in Week 5 in Carolina. Maybe the best, one-on-one cover corner the Niners have had in a really, really long time. But clearly, based on everything that the players and the coaches are saying about him, it's not only his play on the field, but it's the way that he's fitting in emotionally with the guys in the locker room. And uh, maybe you want to, I don't know, not admit how important that is, but it's clearly important considering all the love that this team has for Jimmy Garoppolo. Jimmy Garoppolo has never said a bad word about any of his teammates either. I mean, that this obviously matters. I mean, how would this quarterback situation have gone? How would it have been different if Jimmy Garoppolo wasn't the great guy that he was? One, he probably wouldn't be a 49er. And two, even if somehow he was, maybe he wouldn't have the support of his teammates like he does behind him. So I think it's really, really important. And that's why the Niners are so careful, I think, in free agency, bringing in big name guys, because you're shelling out a lot of money. And it's more than just the talent. You also are evaluating the person and how he's going to fit in your locker room.
Yeah, and that's to me a big part of why, as much as Jimmy Garoppolo is not the best player on the 49ers, he might not even be in the top 5 as far as the best players on the 49ers, talent-wise, skill-wise. But when it comes to leadership, I do think he does embody that, right stuff, so to speak. And Jimmy Garoppolo seems to have everyone on board, not only in reference to, liking him and supporting him, um, but just seeming to like I do think a big part of why a lot of people on the team rally around Jimmy G is example A, as we're talking about, because he immediately is able to recognize, maybe he can't recognize zone coverage, but he can recognize who is going to be a valuable piece of the 49ers, not only on the field, but also off of it. And I think also too, because so many people are split on Garoppolo, and understandably so, that the players see the way that Jimmy is covered and they see the way that he reacts, or in a lot of cases doesn't react to the coverage of him. And I think a lot of athletes, and particularly 49ers, respect that, because when he goes out and has a game like he does against Denver, he's the exact same guy as when, he goes out and has a pretty decent game as we all put together against Carolina. So, he's consistent week in and week out, and he always seems to give praise, and he's very humble about himself. He's very um positive towards his teammates. Like, that to me is in a way what makes the right stuff. It's not necessarily who the best guy is, but who the right person for the job is. And at least for right now, obviously the 49ers have only one option at quarterback for Jimmy Garoppolo. But I do think that as the season progresses and injuries are going to continue to fall upon the 49ers, hopefully not as impactful as they have been in the first 5 weeks, but you're going to have to find those guys to step up with the right stuff, because you're not going to have the luxury of picking, top talented guys. Hopefully, there's a bunch of Mooney Wards out there that can play as well as he has so far, but you're going to need guys, I think, more so, and more importantly, to be on the same page, rather than, all right, I just need a guy that can run a 4-2 and catch a ball over people.
Yeah, and quickly back to Mooney. I was pouring through some Kyle Shanahan transcripts from earlier this week, and it kind of jogged my memory. He was asked about the signing of, Mooney Ward this offseason, and how important that was, and if he's been surprised at all by his play so far this year. And Shanahan kind of, said what we're talking about here. He said, obviously that's what we had hoped that Mooney Ward was going to be like. That's what we wanted to get. That's what we're paying for. And they talked about kind of the challenges of signing a big guy in free agency. He said, we kind of look into that stuff almost every year in terms of signing, a guy to a big free agent contract. And he says, you get into free agency, the money gets so high, and so did his. You see the kind of player with that money attached to him, and we think it would be worth it for him to come in and they got it right. He's been exactly what they thought he's been, is what Shanahan said. But he followed up and said it's really hard to do that. It took the team a while to be able to do that. But when you do take a swing, you hope that you hit. And Shanahan said they really feel like they have. So again, it's kind of like a multi-pronged challenge. It's easier to see the talent on display, and maybe it differs from different systems, with different defenses to a whole, different setup. But it's also kind of trying to manage, personalities and how they all fit. And I think that's where Jimmy Garoppolo probably deserves maybe the most credit. We've talked a lot about the kind of guy he is, and he's maybe, the only quarterback who's been to a Super Bowl as a starter for a whole season that would have been willing to come back to this situation as a backup quarterback. I think that, when you have your quarterback kind of setting that example, I think it probably gives your coaching staff and your roster builders, your front office, a little more leeway in terms of the kind of players that they're bringing in. Because when you see your leader, your quarterback, whether or not he's your best player, whether or not he's your team MVP, when you see the leader of your team, your starting quarterback, exhibit that kind of I don't know, exuding that kind of atmosphere, that kind of energy, I feel like it can kind of correct a lot of ills throughout the rest of the team. So I think that's probably where Garoppolo deserves a lot of credit. Not taking anything away from any of the other individual players who seems like they're all fantastic people. I mean, everyone was singing the praises of Jeff Wilson Jr. this week. He's beloved in the locker room. That's the case for a number of guys. But I think Jimmy Garoppolo and just kind of the person that he is helps not necessarily cover up some other things, but influences everyone and kind of pushes everyone in the right direction.